Two sisters embrace in 1897. Then you notice the terrifying detail at their feet. Professor Samuel Morrison carefully examined the glass plate negative that had been discovered in the basement of the old Blackwood estate in Salem, Massachusetts. The 1897 photograph showed two young women in their early 20s, embracing affectionately in what appeared to be a well-maintained garden. Their white summer dresses and elaborate hairstyles spoke of privilege and refinement, while their serene expressions suggested the kind of sisterly bond that Victorian families often celebrated in formal portraiture. The photograph had been taken outdoors, utilizing the natural lighting that progressive photographers of the era were beginning to favor over the harsh artificial illumination of studio settings. The composition was expertly crafted, with the sisters positioned against a backdrop of flowering bushes and carefully manicured hedgerows that demonstrated the family's wealth and attention to horticultural detail. The older sister, who appeared to be perhaps 23, stood behind her younger sibling with her arms wrapped protectively around her shoulders. Her expression was gentle and maternal, suggesting the kind of relationship where an elder sister had taken responsibility for guiding and protecting her younger family member. The younger woman, probably around 19, leaned back into her sister's embrace with apparent trust and contentment, her face turned slightly toward the camera with a peaceful smile. "Beautiful composition," remarked Dr. Linda Chen, Samuel's colleague at the Massachusetts Historical Society, as she studied the photograph alongside him. The photographer was clearly skilled at capturing intimate family moments. The natural lighting and outdoor setting give it a much more relaxed feeling than the typical studio portraits of the era. Samuel nodded, making notes about the technical aspects of the image for the Historical Society's archives. The photograph had come to their attention as part of a larger collection of materials from the Blackwood family, who had been prominent members of Salem society during the late 19th century. The family's papers and photographs were being donated to help researchers understand the social dynamics of post-Civil War New England communities. According to the documentation, these are the Blackwood sisters, Eleanor and Catherine, Samuel explained, consulting the paperwork that had accompanied the photograph collection. Eleanor was the elder, Catherine the younger. They were known throughout Salem for their charitable work and their devotion to each other after their parents died in a carriage accident in 1895. As Samuel prepared to catalog the image, he noticed something about the ground at the sisters' feet that seemed inconsistent with the otherwise pristine garden setting. The earth appeared to have been recently disturbed in a small area just visible at the bottom edge of the photograph, creating a patch of darker soil that contrasted sharply with the well-established lawn surrounding it. Samuel positioned his professional magnifying equipment over the photograph, focusing particularly on the area of disturbed earth that had caught his attention during his initial examination. The sisters' garden was clearly the product of professional landscaping, with every element carefully planned and maintained to create an impression of natural beauty enhanced by human artistry. The contrast between this horticultural perfection and the patch of freshly turned soil was striking. Under magnification, the disturbed area became more clearly defined as a roughly rectangular patch of earth that had obviously been dug up and then hastily covered. The soil was darker and more loosely packed than the surrounding ground, suggesting recent excavation that hadn't had time to settle naturally. Small clods of earth were scattered around the edges of the disturbed area, indicating that whoever had done the digging had been working quickly and had not taken time to clean up properly. "That's definitely been recently excavated," Dr. Chen observed, studying the magnified image. "The texture and color of the soil is completely different from the established garden beds. It looks like someone dug a hole and then filled it in shortly before this photograph was taken." Samuel measured the dimensions of the disturbed area using the scale provided by other objects in the photograph. The patch appeared to be approximately 6 feet long and 3 feet wide, dimensions that immediately brought disturbing possibilities to mind. The rectangular shape and size were consistent with what might be needed for burying something large, though Samuel tried to focus on less sinister explanations for the excavation. "Could it be a new planting bed?" he suggested, though even as he spoke, he recognized that the location and dimensions didn't match typical gardening practices. The disturbed area was positioned in the middle of an established lawn, rather than along the garden borders where new plantings would normally be installed. The positioning of the sisters in relation to the excavated area also seemed significant. Rather than avoiding the unsightly disturbed ground, they had chosen to pose directly in front of it, almost as if they were deliberately drawing attention to the area or celebrating something connected to the recent digging. Their expressions, which had initially appeared to show simple sisterly affection, now seemed to carry a quality of shared satisfaction or accomplishment. Samuel began to notice other details that took on new significance in light of the disturbed ground. Both sisters' dresses, while appearing pristine at first glance, showed subtle signs of recent activity. Small smudges of dirt around the hems and sleeves that suggested they had been engaged in physical labor shortly before the photograph was taken. Their hands, folded carefully to create an appearance of feminine refinement, showed traces of soil under their fingernails that would have been difficult to clean completely. The timing of the photograph also seemed significant. The lighting and shadows suggested it had been taken in late afternoon or early evening, an unusual time for formal portraiture, but an ideal time for concealing activities from neighbors or casual observers. Samuel's investigation into the Blackwood sisters' background revealed a complex picture of two young women who had cultivated an image of moral righteousness and community service that made them beloved figures in Salem society, even as they were apparently hiding dark secrets beneath their veneer of respectability. Their reputation for charitable work and devotion to community welfare had made them virtually beyond suspicion for any serious wrongdoing. Eleanor and Catherine Blackwood had inherited substantial wealth when their parents died in 1895, leaving them independently wealthy and socially prominent at unusually young ages. Rather than retreating from public life, as might have been expected of young unmarried women in mourning, they had thrown themselves into charitable activities that had earned them widespread admiration throughout Salem and the surrounding communities. The sisters had established a home for wayward girls, funded soup kitchens for the poor, and organized clothing drives for destitute families throughout the region. Their charitable work was regularly praised in the Salem Gazette, with reporters describing them as angels of mercy, whose selfless dedication to helping the less fortunate exemplified the highest ideals of Christian womanhood. "Look at these newspaper accounts," Samuel showed Dr. Chen a collection of clippings from local papers dating to the mid-1890s. The sisters were involved in virtually every charitable organization in the area. They were seen as pillars of the community, completely above reproach. However, as Samuel delved deeper into historical records, he began to find subtle inconsistencies in the sisters' charitable work that suggested their motivations might not have been entirely altruistic. The home for wayward girls they had established seemed to have an unusually high rate of residents who disappeared without explanation, officially described as girls who had returned to their families or found employment elsewhere, but with no documentation of where they had actually gone. Church records showed that several young women who had been residing at the Blackwood Sisters charitable institution had simply vanished from all community records, with no forwarding addresses, no letters to friends or family members, and no appearances at other institutions or communities in the region. The pattern was unusual enough to have generated some quiet concern among church officials, though no formal investigations had been conducted. Samuel also discovered that the sisters had shown particular interest in helping young women who had no family connections or community ties, girls who were essentially alone in the world and whose disappearances might not be noticed or investigated by anyone with sufficient influence to demand answers from authorities. They were targeting vulnerable victims, Dr. Chen realized as they studied the pattern of disappearances. Young women with no family, no connections, no one who would ask serious questions if they vanished. The charitable work was perfect cover for identifying and gaining access to potential victims. The sisters' reputation for moral purity had also provided them with alibis and protection from suspicion that would have been unavailable to people of lower social standing. Samuel's research into the fates of young women who had been associated with the Blackwood sisters' charitable work revealed a disturbing pattern of disappearances that had been systematically overlooked by authorities who were reluctant to investigate accusations against such prominent and seemingly virtuous members of the community. The pattern suggested that Eleanor and Catherine had been using their philanthropic activities as a hunting ground for victims. Between 1895 and 1898, at least 12 young women who had been residents of the Blackwood sisters' home for wayward girls had vanished without trace. Church records showed that these women had been among the most vulnerable members of society: orphans, immigrants with no family connections, and girls who had been disowned by their families for various moral transgressions. Their lack of social connections had made them perfect victims for predators who understood how to exploit the class dynamics of late 19th century New England. Here's the pattern. Samuel explained to Dr. Chen as they mapped out the timeline of disappearances. The sisters would identify young women who had nowhere to go and no one to protect them. They would offer them shelter and assistance, gaining their trust and gratitude. Then, after a few weeks or months, these women would simply disappear, with official explanations that never included any verifiable details. The Salem police records from this period showed that several disappearances had been reported to authorities, but investigations had been perfunctory at best. The Blackwood sisters' reputation and social position had protected them from serious scrutiny, with police officials apparently accepting their explanations without conducting thorough investigations or demanding evidence to support their claims about where the missing women had gone. Samuel found one particularly revealing document in the police archives, a letter from the sister of one missing girl, demanding to know what had happened to her sibling who had been staying at the Blackwood home. The response from the police chief was dismissive and condescending, essentially telling the concerned sister that the Blackwood family's word was sufficient explanation and that no further investigation would be conducted. The class system protected them completely, Dr. Chen observed. Poor desperate girls with no family connections could disappear without anyone with social influence caring enough to demand real answers. Samuel also discovered that the sisters had been careful to vary their methods and timing, never allowing a pattern to become too obvious to casual observers. They had spaced the disappearances over several years, had used different explanations for why girls had left their care, and had continued their charitable work with enough legitimate success stories to maintain their reputation as genuine philanthropists. The 1897 photograph now took on sinister significance as a document that might have been taken shortly after one of these disappearances, with the disturbed ground at the sisters' feet potentially marking the final resting place of their latest victim. The timing and location suggested that the photograph might have been taken as a private commemoration of their successful concealment of evidence. Samuel's enhanced digital analysis of the 1897 photograph revealed additional details that supported his growing suspicion that the disturbed ground at the sisters' feet marked a burial site rather than innocent gardening activity. Using specialized software designed for archaeological photography analysis, he was able to examine subtle variations in soil density and coloration that weren't visible to casual observation. The analysis revealed that the excavated area showed characteristics consistent with a grave that had been hastily filled. The soil density patterns indicated that earth had been removed and then replaced, but not packed with the same firmness as the surrounding undisturbed ground. The irregular surface suggested that whoever had done the digging had been working quickly and had not taken time to restore the area to its original appearance. "Look at these density variations," Samuel showed Dr. Chen the computer-enhanced images that highlighted different soil compositions within the disturbed area. "The patterns are consistent with something large having been buried there, with the soil then replaced but not properly compressed. The depression around the edges suggests that the ground has already started to settle as the loose fill dirt compacts naturally." Even more disturbing were subtle visual clues that suggested the sisters themselves had been directly involved in the excavation work. Enhanced examination of their clothing revealed not just general soil staining, but specific dirt patterns that were consistent with kneeling and digging activities. The distribution of soil on their dresses matched what would be expected from someone engaged in grave digging rather than normal gardening work. Samuel also noticed that both sisters showed physical signs of recent strenuous activity. Their hair, while carefully arranged for the photograph, showed evidence of being hastily repinned after becoming disheveled. Small scratches on their arms, partially concealed by their sleeves, suggested they had been working around thorny plants or rough surfaces, consistent with dragging something heavy through garden areas. The positioning of the sisters in relation to the disturbed ground now seemed deliberately symbolic rather than coincidental. They had chosen to pose directly over what appeared to be a fresh grave, suggesting that the photograph was intended as a private commemoration of their successful concealment of evidence rather than a simple family portrait. "They're celebrating," Dr. Chen realized as they studied the sisters' expressions with new understanding. Those aren't just affectionate smiles, they're expressions of shared satisfaction and accomplishment. They're proud of what they've done and they wanted to document the moment. The outdoor setting and timing of the photograph also made more sense in this context. Late afternoon lighting would have provided enough illumination for photography, while ensuring that neighbors or casual observers wouldn't be able to see clearly what was happening in the Blackwood garden. The natural lighting had been chosen not for artistic reasons, but for practical concealment of criminal activity. Samuel's investigation into who might have been buried in the Blackwood Garden on the day of the 1897 photograph led him to focus on Martha Sullivan, a 17-year-old Irish immigrant who had been residing at the sisters' charitable home and who had vanished from all records just days before the photograph was taken. Martha's case stood out because, unlike many of the other missing girls, she had made connections with other members of the Salem community who had later inquired about her disappearance. Martha had arrived at the Blackwood home in June 1897, after losing her job as a domestic servant when her employer's family had moved to Boston. With no family in America and limited resources, she had been grateful for the sisters' offer of shelter and assistance in finding new employment. According to church records, Martha had been an active participant in religious services and had been well liked by other young women in the community. Martha was different from the usual victims, Samuel explained to Dr. Chen as they reviewed the documentation. She had started to build relationships outside the Blackwood home, which made her more dangerous to the sisters if she witnessed or suspected anything about their activities. Samuel found evidence that Martha had been asking questions about some of the other girls who had previously stayed at the home and then disappeared. A letter from Martha to a friend who worked at another charitable institution in nearby Boston revealed that she had become concerned about the fates of her fellow residents and had been planning to discuss her concerns with church officials. "I fear something terrible has happened to Mary and Susan," Martha had written in a letter dated August 15, 1897, just 2 weeks before her own disappearance. "The sisters say they found employment elsewhere, but Mary promised to write to me and I have heard nothing. Susan left behind all her possessions, which seems strange if she truly found a good position with a family. I plan to speak with Father O'Brien about my concerns." The letter never reached its intended recipient because Martha had disappeared before she could post it. The unfinished correspondence had been found among her belongings at the Blackwood home and had been preserved in the sisters' papers, suggesting that they had discovered her suspicions and had acted quickly to prevent her from exposing their crimes. Samuel's analysis of the photograph's timing confirmed that it had been taken on August 30, 1897, exactly 2 weeks after Martha had written her letter expressing concern about the missing girls. The timing suggested that Martha's disappearance and burial had occurred shortly before the photograph was taken, making her the most likely victim buried beneath the sisters' feet. Church records showed that Martha had been scheduled to meet with Father O'Brien on August 29, 1897, to discuss her concerns about the missing girls. When she failed to appear for the appointment, church officials had initially accepted the sisters' explanation that Martha had suddenly received an offer of employment in Boston and had left immediately to accept the position. However, Martha's failure to collect her final wages from her previous employer, or to contact friends in the community to say goodbye, should have raised suspicions that were ignored due to the Blackwood sisters' reputation for honesty and charitable work. Samuel's investigation revealed that the Blackwood sisters had developed a sophisticated system for identifying, isolating, and murdering vulnerable young women over a period of several years, using their charitable work as both camouflage and hunting ground for their serial killing activities. Their method demonstrated careful planning and psychological manipulation that had allowed them to operate undetected in the heart of a close-knit community. The sisters' selection criteria for victims showed calculated ruthlessness. They specifically targeted young women who were isolated from family and community support systems, orphans, immigrants, girls who had been disowned or rejected by their families for moral transgressions. These victims were chosen not only because they were vulnerable, but because their disappearances would be less likely to generate serious investigations or sustained public concern. They were using their charitable reputation to gain access to the most vulnerable population in Salem, Samuel explained to Dr. Chen as they analyzed the pattern of disappearances. The Home for Wayward Girls was perfect cover because it gave them legitimate reasons to interact with desperate young women while appearing to be helping them. Samuel found evidence that the sisters had refined their method over time, learning from early mistakes and developing more sophisticated techniques for concealing their crimes. Early disappearances in 1895 had generated some community concern, but the sisters had responded by spacing their killings over longer intervals and by creating more elaborate cover stories for why girls had left their care. The sisters had also learned to manipulate their victims psychologically before killing them. Several documents suggested that they had enjoyed playing psychological games with the young women in their care, alternating between kindness and cruelty to create emotional dependence and confusion that made resistance more difficult. A diary fragment found among Eleanor's papers revealed the sadistic pleasure she derived from controlling and terrifying her victims. Catherine and I played our game with the new girl today. We told her that Mary had written from Boston to say how happy she was in her new position, then showed her Mary's dress that was supposedly left behind. The girl's face when she realized Mary would never have left without her only good dress was absolutely delicious. She knows something is wrong, but she cannot bring herself to believe what her instincts are telling her. The sisters had also used their social position to discourage investigations and silence potential witnesses. Their donations to local charities and churches had created networks of influential supporters who were reluctant to believe accusations against such apparently virtuous benefactors. Their wealth had allowed them to provide gifts and financial support to officials whose cooperation they needed to avoid scrutiny. Samuel discovered that the sisters had been particularly skilled at timing their crimes to coincide with community events or distractions that would minimize attention to missing persons reports. Several disappearances had occurred during harvest festivals, religious celebrations, or other occasions when the community's attention was focused elsewhere. The 1897 photograph now represented not just evidence of a single murder, but documentation of a killing spree that had claimed at least 12 lives and possibly more, all concealed beneath a facade of Christian charity and sisterly devotion. Samuel's investigation revealed that several members of the Salem community had suspected that something sinister was happening at the Blackwood home, but their concerns had been systematically dismissed or suppressed by authorities who were either genuinely deceived by the sisters' reputation or were actively complicit in covering up their crimes to protect the community's image and their own interests. Father Michael O'Brien, the priest who had been scheduled to meet with Martha Sullivan about her concerns, had kept private records that showed he had been troubled by the pattern of disappearances from the Blackwood home. His personal journal, preserved in the church archives, revealed that several other young women had come to him with similar concerns about missing friends and fellow residents, but his attempts to investigate had been blocked by church superiors who feared scandal. The bishop instructed me to avoid any actions that might bring disrepute upon the Blackwood family or our charitable partnerships, Father O'Brien had written in September 1897, shortly after Martha's disappearance. I am told that the sisters' generous donations to church projects are too valuable to risk over unsubstantiated concerns about girls who are known to be unreliable and transient by nature. Samuel found evidence that local police officials had received multiple reports about missing girls from the Blackwood home, but had been instructed by their superiors to avoid intensive investigations that might embarrass prominent community members. The police chief's correspondence revealed that he had been under pressure from city officials to maintain Salem's reputation as a safe, well-ordered community where charitable institutions could operate without interference. Several neighbors had also noticed disturbing activities at the Blackwood estate, but had been reluctant to report their observations due to the sisters' social standing. Samuel found a letter from a neighboring homeowner who had observed suspicious late-night digging in the Blackwood garden, but had convinced himself that it must be legitimate landscaping work because ladies of such moral character would certainly not be engaged in anything improper. The local newspaper, the Salem Gazette, had consistently published glowing reports about the sisters' charitable work while ignoring or minimizing any negative information about their activities. Samuel discovered that the paper's editor had received substantial advertising revenue from businesses owned by the Blackwood family's financial associates, creating economic incentives to maintain positive coverage and suppress potentially damaging stories. The entire community was complicit, Dr. E. Chen observed as they reviewed the evidence of systematic cover-up. Whether through genuine deception, willful blindness, or active corruption, everyone with the power to stop these murders chose to protect the killers instead of their victims. The class dynamics of late 19th century New England had created a perfect environment for serial killers who understood how to manipulate social prejudices and economic dependencies. Poor, marginalized young women were considered disposable by a society that valued the reputation and financial contributions of wealthy benefactors more than the lives of those they claimed to be helping. Samuel realized that the 1897 photograph represented not just evidence of murder, but documentation of a community's moral failure and the deadly consequences of prioritizing social respectability over human life. Samuel's research into the final phase of the Blackwood sisters' killing spree revealed that their murders had continued for at least 2 more years after the 1897 photograph, with their methods becoming increasingly bold and their victim count rising as they gained confidence from their complete impunity from investigation or prosecution. The photograph now appeared to mark not the end of their crimes, but a celebration of their success and a documentation of their growing sense of invulnerability. By 1899, the sisters had refined their operation to such an extent that they were killing approximately 1 young woman every 3 months, while maintaining their reputation as Salem's most charitable and virtuous citizens. Their success had made them reckless, leading them to take greater risks and to leave more evidence that would eventually contribute to their downfall. Samuel discovered that the sisters' final victims had included not only residents of their charitable home, but also young women from the broader community who had made the mistake of trusting the wrong benefactors. Mary Catherine O'Neill, a 19-year-old seamstress who had been seeking employment, had disappeared in March 1899 after accepting the sisters' offer to help her find work with a respectable family in Boston. The pattern escalated, Samuel explained to Dr. Chen as they tracked the final murders. They were no longer limiting themselves to girls who were already under their care. They were actively hunting throughout the community, using their reputation to lure victims who might otherwise have been suspicious of strangers. The end of the sisters' killing spree had come not through police investigation or community action, but through a tragic accident that had exposed their crimes in a way that could no longer be covered up or ignored. In October 1899, a severe storm had caused flooding throughout Salem, and the rising water had disturbed several of the makeshift graves in the Blackwood Garden, bringing human remains to the surface where they could be seen by neighbors and emergency workers. The discovery of multiple bodies in the sisters' garden had finally forced authorities to conduct a real investigation, though even then, the sisters' social position had provided them with advantages that ordinary criminals would not have enjoyed. They had been allowed to remain in their home under house arrest rather than being immediately imprisoned, and they had been given time to destroy evidence and coordinate their stories before formal questioning began. However, the physical evidence had been overwhelming. Police excavation of the garden had revealed the remains of at least 15 young women, far more than Samuel had initially estimated based on the documented disappearances. Many of the victims had never been officially reported as missing, suggesting that the sisters had been killing women whose disappearances had gone entirely unnoticed by authorities. The investigation had also revealed that the sisters had been keeping trophies from their victims: jewelry, clothing, personal items that they had preserved as mementos of their crimes. These items had been found carefully organized in a locked room in the sisters' house, arranged like exhibits in a private museum of murder. Eleanor and Catherine Blackwood had been tried and convicted in 1900, but even their trial had been influenced by their social position and gender, with defense attorneys arguing that such refined ladies could not possibly have committed the brutal crimes of which they were accused, despite overwhelming evidence of their guilt. The discovery and investigation of the Blackwood sisters' crimes had profound impacts on Salem's community, and provided crucial insights into how social privilege and gender stereotypes could protect even the most prolific serial killers from detection and prosecution. Samuel's research revealed that the 1897 photograph had been just one piece of evidence in a case that had ultimately exposed not only the sisters' murders, but also the systematic failures that had allowed them to kill with impunity for years. The exhumation of the Blackwood Garden in 1899 had revealed a horror that shocked even experienced investigators. The remains of 17 young women had been found buried throughout the property, some in the formal garden areas, and others in more remote sections of the estate where discovery would have been less likely. The victims ranged in age from 15 to 23, and all had died from violence that medical examiners described as systematic and prolonged torture, followed by strangulation. Eleanor and Catherine Blackwood had been executed in January 1901, making them among the first women in Massachusetts history to be sentenced to death for serial murder. However, even their execution had been controversial, with some community members continuing to argue that such refined ladies must have been insane rather than genuinely evil, reflecting society's difficulty in accepting that women could be capable of calculated, predatory violence. The case had exposed the deadly consequences of social prejudice and class bias in law enforcement and community oversight, The systematic dismissal of concerns about missing poor and immigrant women had allowed the sisters to kill 17 people while being celebrated as pillars of Christian virtue and community service. The Blackwood case became a landmark in American criminal justice. Dr. Chen explained as they prepared their research for publication. It demonstrated how gender stereotypes and class prejudices could create perfect camouflage for serial killers who understood how to manipulate social expectations and institutional biases. Samuel's analysis of the 1897 photograph had revealed it to be a chilling document of calculated evil disguised as sisterly affection. The image showed Eleanor and Catherine Blackwood literally standing over the grave of one of their victims while posing as loving siblings, creating a permanent record of their contempt for human life and their confidence that their crimes would never be discovered or punished. The photograph now hangs in the Salem Police Department's training facility as a reminder to investigators that criminals can hide behind any facade, and that the most dangerous predators are often those who appear most respectable and trustworthy. The case has become a standard example in criminal psychology courses, demonstrating how serial killers can exploit social institutions and community trust to facilitate their crimes. Modern forensic analysis of the photograph continues to reveal new details about the sisters' methods and mindset, providing insights that help contemporary investigators recognize similar patterns of institutional manipulation and victim targeting. The Blackwood sisters' legacy serves as a permanent warning about the dangers of allowing social privilege to shield criminals from scrutiny and the tragic consequences when communities choose to protect their image rather than their most vulnerable members. The 17 young women who died in the Blackwood Garden are now remembered as victims not just of two individual killers, but of a social system that valued respectability over human life and that allowed evil to flourish under the protection of charitable reputation and class privilege.